Let's just talk about a few more tags and types of inputs. This is a little bit more superficial stuff that you might often Google, but there will be a few sort of bigger issues that come up as we talk about it. So we already talked about input type equal text. I did not mention some of the other attributes you can have in a text. We talked about name because that's really important. Type, of course, important. Yeah, so text out, what is the size? How many characters wide is it? What is the max length people are allowed to type in? That sort of thing. Numeric fields, I mentioned briefly before. If you don't want to hear that again, you can skip ahead 90 seconds. But yeah, there is length and max length, just like there was for text inputs, which is kind of weird for numbers, but it's how wide and how many characters you can type into there. In addition, we have min and max. And then, as I mentioned with several tags, if you pre-specify the value tag for some of these things, value, in this case, value equal 25, then it's pre-filled with 25. It wasn't quite showing in the previous video, but I fixed that, so it's showing here. And one thing to note about value equal 25, it looks like a number, right? Well, put it in HTML, all attributes are strings, okay? And when they get sent over to a web server, everything is serialized down to a bunch of bytes that go into the network packet. So yeah, view this 25 as a string 25, and we're going to put it in quotes. Don't leave those quotes off. All attributes should have quotes. It's pretty simple. So, okay. Okay, so input type equal text, input type equal number. We already talked about input type equal checkbox. I'll talk more in a moment about boolean attributes, namely this checked equal checked, which is looks kind of weird. You may have guessed that's why this checkbox, when you first loaded this page, this lectures page, that checkbox is actually already pre-checked. It's unlike the text where we might fill in the value by adding a value attribute. We need a value attribute to use when this thing will be checked. Whether or not it's checked is a different issue, so that's why there's a different attribute checked. Okay, radio buttons. Here we are. I haven't quite talked about that. Input type equal radio, and we have 3 buttons here, and as I click one of them, the others go away. I can only select one of these 3 options, so it's great when you have that sort of input. Note that if I have any text that wants to go with it, that's of course up to me. The input tag just does that radio button by itself. We have name equal age, the same name attribute for 3 different input tags. That's a little bit new or different, but it makes a lot of sense. Morally, these are all one input. There's only going to be one input coming from this whole bank of 3 radio buttons there. So they all need the same name. In particular, it's the name so that that's how the browser knows when you select one to deselect the others. You might have 2 different banks of radio buttons. One bank of radio buttons here, another bank of 17 radio buttons down here. And when you select one of these, it unselects any of the others among that bank. And when you select one of these, it deselects the others within that bank. But they're independent of each other. How would the browser know? Oh, these would all have one name attribute, and these would all have a different name attribute. But, I mean, they would all have the same other name attribute. Okay, and of course, as we've seen before, it's the value equal. That's sort of like with checkboxes. That will control what value gets sent. So if I were to submit this form and have the middle one selected, yeah, the key value pair age and 30 to 50 would be the key value pair that's given to the server. So I will just mention here there's an ID attribute that I include. I'll mention that more in a moment. But I'll just throw out their name attribute, ID attribute, different things for different purposes. In English, name and ID are a little bit somewhat synonymous, so they're different here. So in particular, you can never have 2 ID attributes with the same value within an entire web page. Every ID needs to be unique. So, okay, a little bit on the web page about why radio buttons are called radio buttons and how old-timey radios worked, both physically and electronically. Here's another type of input here. It's a lot like text input, except it's not a tag input type equal text. Okay, this is tag textarea. Not a tag input type equal textarea, just plain old textarea tag. That's kind of confusing. Oh well, they forgot to consult me when they designed the web, so they came up with that. There's some little slight rationale for that about it's not an empty tag, but yeah, I don't really buy it. Okay, so textarea name equal comments. Just like before, you can have a rows and a columns attribute there for how big the box is. And you can go ahead and provide in the body of that tag, you can actually provide some text, and that will be the initial value provided. So we don't actually say value, we just actually put it in the body of the text area. So again, a little bit different than how text inputs work. So, although when I look at this, it's a little bit weird because this initial contents is sitting here and it looks like it's being centered in the box. How did I get this to be centered? And the answer is I didn't. Okay. In fact, if I highlight the whole thing in the box, it becomes a little bit more clear. I have initial contents. Before the I of initial, there is actually a whole bunch of spaces. Well, why is that? Oh, because up in my textarea tag, this is taken from, you can do a show source, but what we see here is taken from that show source. Yeah, I actually had the textarea tag, and then I had 30 spaces followed by initial contents. Why did I have 30 spaces there? Oh, because I was trying to indent my HTML nicely, right? I have a text area that's inside a list item, that's inside an ordered list, that's inside a paragraph, that's inside the body tag, which is inside an HTML tag, and I was trying to indent this all, so this sort of would screw up my indentation because really I should probably have this entirely left justified if I was to have that initial contents there. So, whatever. Actually, if you look at us, not just spaces before the I of initial, but after the S of contents, yeah, it looks like there's a whole nother line and 30 more spaces. Oh yeah, there they are. I really did have that in my HTML source, so that's why it's there. Again, people often say, oh, browsers ignore spaces. Well, that's not quite true. They're very aware of where there are and are not spaces in the input HTML. Most of the time, they take over the formatting themselves. A browser says, hey, where do I put a line break and so on? I'll worry about that myself. But it certainly knows where the spaces are. So, okay. Drop-down boxes. That's kind of fun. So here's a little drop-down box with Mr., Ms., Mrs., Miss. Okay. How do you make one of these? Again, it's not another input type equal drop-down or anything like that. It's a select tag. And you'll have a name attribute. We're unsurprised by that. Okay, so select name equal title. And then within the body of the select, we have option, 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 option. Okay, so you can sort of, you understand what that's all doing. One of those will get selected. When I submit, the name title will have the value of whatever that particular selected option is. So in this case, lowercase m, lowercase s would be the value associated with that menu item. So, by the way, it's a total side comment here, but worth knowing. When do you use the different titles? See, Mr. is for men. Mrs. and Miss, what's the difference there? Ah, right, if they're married or not. So when do you use Ms? What is Ms for? And I ask that because most people say, oh yeah, I use Ms when you're not sure if the woman is married or not. And I'll quibble with that a little. I mean, you certainly use it in that situation, but I'll quibble with that a little bit. I can talk about Ms. Clinton. I actually happen to know her marital status, but I'll go ahead and say Ms. Clinton because her marital status is not part of what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm just using her title, and I don't want a title that draws attention to her marital status because that has nothing to do. Now, if I'm maybe having a party and sending out invitations and you're trying to look at a guest list and you're kind of like, oh, I wonder who's single here at the party and so on. Then you might be interested in titles of Miss or Mrs. Of course, men don't have a title that indicates whether or not they're on the market. But unless you're like that, you should really use Ms. if the marital status is not what you want to be bringing into the argument or bringing to the table. So it's a throwback, you know, the fact that Mrs. and Miss, the fact that the female titles must indicate whether or not they're on the market, as a throwback to when that was the one single defining most important aspect of a woman in society. So we'll go with Ms. Okay, and I guess actually I should have put in mix these days, right? For people who don't want to necessarily identify as male or female. But, okay, what else? So we have all those input tags with the different types, and then we had text area, and now we have select. We're back to an input tag, input type equals submit. This is actually an input type, okay? And it's a special, but it's a special one that when you click this one, the enclosing form will get submitted, okay? So again, when you click on the submit button, where would the data go? I can click it here because I'm not actually inside a form tag. It's a hint. Where does it know where to submit to? It just submits to another URL, right? But I don't see anything here. Oh, the URL that it submits to is back in the form tag. The enclosing form tag had that action equal followed by a URL. Here we have input type equals submit, value equal, and know whatever text you have here is going to be the text that shows up in the button. Browsers will probably do that. What key value pair gets submitted? Well, I don't have a name for this input tag. If I added a name equal, hey, I am the submit button, then when you click that button and submitted the form, one of the key value pairs would be, hey, I am the submit button, and the value submit data to server. Usually not that useful, interesting. You don't really think of that as an input to the form, but we will use it later when we're talking about doing validation. So, okay. And there's a reset button as well, but I'm not going to worry about that. One tag that I don't show here, but is worth noting, and this applies to all the input types. So another attribute that I can have for input tags, and I can also have this attribute for select tags and text area tags, is required. Okay, I can go ahead and have a text field, input type equal text, required equal required. Okay, what does that do? Oh, it's required. If somebody tries to leave it empty and they hit the submit button for that form, the browser probably is going to say, hey, I'm going to be nice. I'm not going to actually submit the form. I'm going to go, maybe put up a little message or something like that saying, hey, such and such is a required field. Please fill it in. But it's just good to know that, hey, for logistics of doing things, HTML5 now has this required attribute for all the various input tags. Just one note about this required equal required. And I'll go back to this checked equal checked. It seems kind of weird. These are, like a checkbox is either on or off, right? And so it's either checked or not checked. And a field's either required or not required. So it would make sense to me if it was something like the attribute I could have was required equal true or required equal false. That would make a lot of sense to me. And checked equal, back for this checkbox, should I start with that checkbox checked or not? Checked equal true or checked equal false. That would make a lot of sense to me. Again, they forgot to consult with me when they designed the web. So we're stuck with either the attribute's there or it's not there at all. If it's there, it counts as truish. And if it's not there at all, then it's false. Okay? And if it's there, now I'm going to say for this class, all attributes must have values. They're in quotes. I have a very simple model. All attributes have a value. Okay? So in particular, I'm going to say, hey, checked equal, and you can't say checked equal true or false. It turns out there's only one allowed value. If you have the checked tag at all, it must be equal to checked. And if you have a required attribute equal to something, it must be required equal required. That's the only thing you can fill in for the value of that attribute. Just odd. Why it didn't go with true, false, I don't know. I'll confess. HTML5 with these boolean attributes, they're like, well, if you just include checked and don't say equal anything at all, if you just say checked as the attribute name and don't mention an attribute value, that satisfies HTML5. I'm going to be a little bit more pedantic in this class and want XHTML, You can be both. You can be consistently both valid HTML5 and valid XHTML. XHTML has the very simple rule. All attributes have values, and they're in quotes. So yeah, we'll go with this checked equal checked or required equal required. So occasionally you see these boolean attributes around, and it's a bit odd. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say on that. We're going to come back more, and we're going to talk a little bit about the label tag, and then we're going to talk about subarrays, grouping together inputs into subarrays. You know, I take it back. Let's go ahead and talk about, I know it's already been a long video, but I'm going to go ahead and take another 2 minutes and talk about the label attribute. If you're looking at a checkbox, and I'm going to actually go to a sample form here. Let's item form 0. I'm going to go to a different URL that's about to be linked from this page. Okay. You know, I have some click boxes, some check boxes here, and you know, I can mouse over it and try to get right in the middle of the checkbox and check that. If I'm a little bit off, it's kind of annoying, right? It doesn't actually click that. What I would like is that when I'm trying to select something, if I click on the text corresponding to the input, I wish that would work, okay? So, and it turns out you can actually do that. And I have some examples going on down here with these, what type of bagel. If you look at it, I'm actually clicking on the text, not the button itself. But it knows, somehow it knows that this text, Poppy, is related to the button right next to it. Now, the web designer, had to tell the browser that. I have to say, hey, this text here, part of this particular input checkbox. Let's look at a view source. Okay, and look at an example. I'm going to try to get it down onto one line so it doesn't scroll as much. I know it's smaller, but looks a little bit better. Here's my input checkbox. Okay, name equals sesame. And here's the text, sesame, that goes with it. Okay, sesame no schmear. I put both of those inside a label tag. So this is just handy. This is a pretty superficial issue altogether, and this only affects how Chrome sort of helps the user. It's nothing that gets submitted with the form. But it sort of says, hey, if I have an input and some other text inside a label tag, clicking on anything inside that label tag will select that one input. It will send the focus to that one input. So that's kind of handy. I suggest you do with all your radio buttons and all your checkboxes, maybe even with your text boxes as well. Wrap a label tag around the actual input device and the input tag itself. Now, I will sort of go ahead and point out that you can actually separate where that label goes from the input tag. So here's a comments text area here, and I could click in it, certainly, to get it. As it is, if I go ahead, I'm going to click somewhere else, send the focus away. If I click on the word you or can, nothing happens. Those are sort of excluded. We'll see why in a second. But you know, the words focus here, I wrote this web page so that if you click on the H of here, or anywhere in the word here, it does suddenly select that text area, and I can start typing immediately, and I didn't have to navigate to precisely within that box, okay? So that's kind of handy, so what's the up point? Or the takeaway point? You can even have labels which are geographically separated from the corresponding input. How do you do that? Let's go and look at, I'm going to do a show source, and we're going to look for the you can also focus here. Focus here. Okay. So I had a paragraph, I had a text area. I did not have a label around this text area. Okay. Then a little bit later, I have the words you can also, those were just text, not related to this. And then I opened a label tag with the words focus here. So focus here became a label. But how did it know that the label was for that particular text area? there's with the label, if you don't want to enclose the input within somewhere in the body of the label, you can make a label tag and you include an attribute for equal, and you can give the ID of somebody else, okay, of something else on the page. And then it knows that, hey, clicking on anywhere inside this label, send the focus. This is again the browser, just nothing to do with the server. The browser will say, hey, send the focus to the element whose ID is whatever you have there, in this case, comments. Okay, and so I'll just finish up with pointing out that, yeah, the ID and the name are different issues. Name is what goes off and sent to the server as part of the key value pairs. ID, totally separate, is, hey, every tag in an HTML document could have an ID, and all the IDs must be distinct. IDs give you a way to talk about in the entire tree of HTML. They give you a way to talk about one particular node right in the middle of your tree by name, which is exactly what we're doing with that for label. Hey, I'm over here, but I'm going to talk about some node way over there. Okay, just give its ID attribute. So ID is something that's the client cares about, okay, because it needs to know the different parts of that HTML page, but is not related to the server at all. Whereas the name attribute is primarily for the server to know what people are talking about. That said, if you have a name attribute and an ID attribute, make them the same. Don't go around making up different names for these things. That you'll just drive yourself crazy in the end. Don't have it comments and then, you know, comments with a K is the ID or something like that. Keep one name, and you realize you're using it as both the name, the value of the name, and the value of the ID, and within context you know how to use it, but you don't have to think about now which one did I spell with the letter K and which one did I abbreviate a little bit and which one did I spell out. Yeah, just don't go there. Use the name and ID as being the same, with one drawback. There's one place where you can't have the name of the attribute, the name and the ID be the same. ID has to be unique, and there's one place where we need to use the name over and over and over again. Yeah, radio buttons. The banks of a radio button had to be the same name, but they can't be the same ID. They're different actual buttons. And if you look at this in the example I had back on the lectures page, I had name equal age for all three of these radio buttons, and then the ID, I still actually was a little bit mechanical about what the ID was. It was age hyphen and then the value that got used. And that makes it, again, real easy to just remember or be consistent or things like that. And I don't need to worry about spelling something or always going back. That's where you spend a lot of your time, going back. What did I call that again? And that's what slows you down in programming. So anything you can do to streamline that is helpful. Whew. Okay, a bunch of smaller little topics there, but you're now good to start writing some pretty cool forms on your web pages. Awesome.